Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry. This is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today, we're both very excited to be talking to you about, don't remember when it was made. Cherry Tooth, the movie that was made in some year. Cherry.
1988.
Okay. I'm going to start again. Hello, welcome to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry. This is my co-host. Your name is Chris Huddleston.
Oh,
and today...
I forgot my name is Chris Huddleston.
This is off to a great start. Folks, if you're just listening for the first time, it doesn't get any more professional than this.
It does not.
Anyway, today we're going to talk about Cherry 2000.
In the future, the world has survived. Romance has not.
Right, so we'll say a dinner, complete sexual encounter, optional episode in the morning, right?
I gotta run this past my own lawyer.
Pleasure is strictly business. But it will be possible to have the perfect mate. A Cherry 2000.
Looks great. Thanks.
Thoughtful. Desirable. She'll never run out on him. Just short out.
I'm sorry, kid. Total internal meltdown. Now you got her basic memory right here. Vocal patterns, verbal, whatever, basic voice. Don't look so glum. Your chassis out for the count, all right? You got the chip, you go in, you pick yourself out a new model, you slide it in the slot. You got yourself your girl back in a brand new frame.
Give me a call if you find a Cherry. Cherry 2000.
Look, my friend, you're gonna be a very old man, round in the middle and bone dry before you find one of those in these parts.
That's a chance I'll just have to take.
Then, the adventure begins.
Why don't you hire a tracker to go into Zone 7?
We got a policy against trackers in these parts.
Nobody goes into Zone 7.
They got one of the original warehouses down there. Girls stacked on the shelves like pies.
I'm looking for someone to go into Zone 7.
I'm E. Johnson. You're not gonna find anybody better than me, mister. I'm not a machine. Do you know where they keep these babies? We call it the graveyard. It is the worst place in the zone. Well, maybe I can get in there and find this thing, but I need somebody riding shotgun in order to make it out in one piece.
I want you to chase those birds till they drop.
If you think it's tough to meet the right people now, wait till you go looking for a Cherry 2000.
Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do, and this is from Rotten Tomatoes, and I had a lot of questions about this movie. I don't know if I'm dense or just didn't pay enough attention, but I would pick some nits with this this synopsis. But anyway, it says, in the post-apocalyptic California of 2017, Sam Treadwell, who's played by David Andrews, manages a recycling plant. His companion is Cherry 2000, Pamela Gidley, a lifelike robot who caters to his every need. When Cherry expires, Treadwell refuses to settle for a newer, less attractive robot. Salvaging the chip containing her personality, he hires tracker E. Johnson, Melanie Griffith, to lead him through the lawless desert zone where a replacement Cherry 2000 model can be found. And this was directed by Steve de Jarnatt, who also directed Miracle Mile that we did a few weeks ago. And so you had looked through his filmography and had brought this one up. And so, all right. So neither of us had seen this one. So what did you think about this?
I mean, I thought it was fun. I thought it was interesting to see Melanie Griffith in a role like this. It's not that complicated a movie. I enjoy those 80s. Just I like dystopian, sci-fi anyway. And the sweet spot is 80s dystopian stuff, which is very different than dystopian stuff from our 2000s era, right? Mm-hmm. It's not great. There's a reason why I hadn't seen it. I think I had been aware of it because it's got racy title. I mean, it's supposed to have a sexual hook. Cherry 2000 implies, sex. Yeah, and he's going into the wasteland. I love it. So it's LA and there's like Zone 7 or whatever, which is apparently was it a nuclear? I don't know that they say
So
what
that was one of the questions that I had. I didn't. So initially, and I don't want to, step on your
please.
introductory comments here, but I was kind of confused because the trailers, is pretty much all stuff in the desert. And then when the film started out, so I thought, oh, it's a Mad Max kind of a thing. And then the movie starts out and it's in the city and people have jobs and drive around in cars and stuff. So I thought, oh, well, maybe this isn't a post-apocalyptic thing. And then when he goes looking, doing, hires the tracker and everything, then that's all the entire rest of the movie is in the desert.
Yeah.
So I didn't really, does the movie ever say what happened? He makes some comment about when he fought in the wars of the border wars or something like that, but they don't really let you know. So it's not like a total apocalypse, but there are just these kind of forbidden zones, right? That's how I sort of got it.
That's all that I remember from it. I don't remember them getting into the nuts and bolts. It's certainly not radioactive, like they're out Mad Maxing around in Zone 7 and they're not concerned about their skin sloughing off or dying of radiation poisoning. So, I mean, maybe it's just one of those movies where it's like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Don't think about it too hard. Okay.
Right.
I mean, it's not, I didn't get hung up on that. I was just like, okay. There's a crazy, he's not a mob boss, but there's a crazy kind of Mad Max kingpin out in Zone 7 that everyone's afraid of. And
that actor's name, he was I'm sure you recognized him because he was in tons of TV in the day. And I didn't even know what his name was, but his name is Tim Thomerson. That guy always seemingly all the roles he played were kind of like this, where he's just kind of crazy and wild, but he's really good.
And not to be confused with Tom Timerson.
Exactly. Two completely different,
totally different
guys.
types. It's a great gonzo crazy 80s nut job performance. Like, okay, you're out in the wasteland, you're crazy. And he's like, got it. And he's chewing the furniture.
Yeah.
And he has this sort of, his home base is sort of set up like a nightclub or a diner's got a flashing sign over, and he's got a crew of people that live out there with him, his cronies or whatever. And it's absurd, but our hero and our heroine have to get past these, malicious cuckoo birds to get to this storehouse where the Cherry 2000 model that he's in love with, apparently they don't make it anymore. The sex robots they make nowadays are kind of crappy and aren't anything like the old. Everyone's like, oh, those are they talk about them like classic cars.
They don't make them like
Thunderbird.
that.
Yeah. Oh, that was that was a great machine.
The good old days.
Yeah. And
back in my day, we had Cherry 2000s.
Exactly. And so it but what the surprise of this film is that it actually turns out to be a relationship movie. Like it's
basically a romantic comedy without much of the comedy and like with some action thrown in, because it follows a romantic comedy
template
kind of plot line.
Right? Boy not meets girl. Boy buys girl robot, right? Boy loses girl robot. Boy goes out into Zone 7 to recover girl robot and meets, a real girl along the way, and then ends up falling for the real girl. So spoiler alert, we spoil all these. So he does end up getting a new Cherry 2000, and he puts a little tiny mini DVD of her entire personality into the new one. And then of course, compared to this new firecracker redhead that he's met in the desert, he realizes she's sweet on him from the beginning. Right. She's kind of a tough as nails. She doesn't let it show, but it's clear that she's kind of fallen for this guy and he doesn't get it. And that makes her grumpy. And but by the end he comes around. She bails out of the helicopter they're escaping in or whatever it is, and he goes back for her, even though he doesn't need to.
Because
he's got his thing.
Because it can't hold the weight of 3 of the robot and the 2 of them, so he dumps off the robot.
Right. So it's not. I think that in different, if Denis Villeneuve had made this, it would have deeper waters to it. It would explore what it means to be human and what love is, and and the subtle ways in which our love can change through experience. And this movie does none of those things. This movie drives muscle cars around in the desert and shoots, RPGs at houses and vehicles and mesas and blows them up. And it's fun. One of the things that really struck me from this was, how strange an actress she is on screen. Like
Melanie Griffith.
Yeah. Melanie Griffith there's no denying that the camera loves her. You can't take your eyes off of her. And she's sexy. She's got sex appeal, but her line delivery, there's something so almost lazy isn't the right word, but there's sort of a way that she talks. It's just sort of like, it's a little bit like marble mouthed or something. And it was, you know what I'm talking about? Or is that just me?
Yeah.
And I was just like, what is it about this woman that is so inherently interesting? Because it's not Meryl Streep. She ain't,
Initially, I thought, and as the movie went along, I liked her better. But initially I thought, wow, she is horribly miscast in this, because she's supposed to be this badass, and she drives this old Mustang or whatever it is that has nitrous in it, and she drives with no lights on and all this kind of thing. And
she drives by feel. I just drive by feel. Yeah. Well, you're like, okay.
So
is there a seatbelt in this thing?
I initially thought, and was completely wrong, but I wonder if you thought this. Well, let me just say first, with Melanie Griffith, she's always been a woman that, as an adult, always, to me, she has kind of like a little girl voice, and again, that didn't help with the badass thing, as the movie went along, I liked her more in it, but did you think that she was going to turn out to be a robot too? Did that ever cross your mind? Because in the beginning, I thought, she goes by feel or whatever. I thought, she's going to be a robot too. He's going to find out in the end that she's also a robot.
Yeah. I mean,
I guess this isn't that kind of movie. It's not Blade Runner,
Sometimes these movies go that way, but I never felt that way. I thought from the beginning, I'm like, this isn't going to be, it is. It's going to be one of those movies where like she becomes the love interest and he finally realizes how uninteresting a robot is compared to a real girl. And they hit that. Yeah. They kind of hammer that anvil a lot throughout the movie.
Right.
So to the point where I was kind of like, okay. I mean, but you see it coming. You see it coming in a lot of movies, and it doesn't ruin the movie. That doesn't ruin the movie for me. This one just doesn't run that deep. This is just
right.
An 80s sci-fi romp. And I thought, interestingly, they didn't play a lot of the cards that this feels like a B movie. And in the 80s, they played the kind of TNA card. You'd see some skin. I guess there's that sex scene in the beginning that so in the beginning, he and his Cherry 2000, he kind of come home like, don't worry, darling. He comes home and the robot is standing there in a red dress, with made dinner and has a cocktail ready for him. And they end up starting to make love on the floor of the kitchen, or maybe it's the bathroom.
It's in the kitchen.
And the sink overflows or something. And she shorts out in the water and has
a bad design flaw.
Yes.
your sex robot, you can't, take showers or baths or anything like that.
Well,
with it. So that's
and I had the thought that he cares enough about her that I had the thought that in this world they probably are waterproof. But she's just an old enough model that something went wrong, and that's how it fails. Because otherwise, he wouldn't, they're rolling around in the suds for a while. And if it was a problem, she would be like, this is not good for me. I cannot be wet like this. I don't know.
And the guy is legit in love with her. I mean, it's not like, he looks at her like a
totally enough that even though, so he takes her to the shop and the guy's like, total system meltdown. I'm sorry, pal. There's just no fixing this. The good news is that her brain chip or whatever is totally unharmed. So you can pop this. We can, the new models don't take this, but we can just transfer it. We've got the machines that'll read it, and we'll just buy yourself a new one of the new models, and we'll put your girlfriend's personality into that. And he doesn't want that. He wants one that he wants her again. So he wants another one of those exact models. It's really important to him. And a number of people through the movie kind of roll their eyes and like, he does meet one guy that totally gets it. He's like, oh, I know what you're talking about. It's kind of creepy. And you're like, oh. Anyway, he says, I got to have the real deal. And he convinces her. The Melanie Griffith character is just pretty much, if the price is right, it seems like she's willing to go into like do stuff in Zone 7 almost for the thrill of it. One of the things I liked about her performance is that although she's not capital A acting anything really, she's just sort of showing up and movie starring and looking comfortable on camera and delivering her lines. And, there's no effort displayed here, but that carries through to this sort of crazy impossible mission where they're like hooking the car up to a giant crane that swings it across while people are shooting at them. And she's just singularly unruffled,
Yeah.
They risk their lives. She drives without the lights on through uncharted desert. She drives by feel, which is that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But somehow Melanie Griffith playing it with such ease, like, yeah, no biggie. You kind of like, oh, okay. I guess she's just crazy like that,
Yeah, and she's likable in this,
Yeah.
So there's definitely a charisma to her,
If you're watching this, you can see the image behind me. They give her this kind of bob, this kind of red, shag haircut that I think really looks good on her in this crazy. I guess it's an echo of Cherry. She is not Cherry 2000, but she's this sort of bombshell redhead. I don't know.
And along those lines, she's really attractive, but the actress that is Cherry 2000, who I was not familiar with, is named Pamela Gidley. She was in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I don't know what role she played in that, but she is absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
I thought, so it's like, the guy knows that she's a robot and everything, but she is just really, really beautiful. But
that kind of works. I think that works in the casting though, because she's blonde and I think blue-eyed and sort of conventionally magazine pretty in that way, and then they try and counterpoint it with the design of the bounty hunter character, who is very kind of outside the lines. She's obviously
and exciting
beautiful
and
too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, whereas they by the end they kind of portray the Cherry 2000 as
boring.
Boring. Yeah, exactly. The other question that I had that I didn't really completely understand, and I don't know if the movie explained this and I just missed it, but what was the issue with the trackers that people were, like when he goes to the, there's a little period where he's with the crazy guy that has this community at it, because it's like his ex-wife or his ex-girlfriend or something like that is there, of the main character. And they're very against trackers. So they catch this one guy who turns out he lies, but he turns out to be a tracker, and they kill him. And it's like, we don't like trackers around here. Did you understand what the issue was with the trackers that they were?
No, I just think it was it made me think of,
again, maybe it's one of those things you just don't think about it too much, but
yeah, I think it was just sort of painting like, oh, those trackers, they're bad news. They're like bounty hunters. They're not socially acceptable characters. They're not trustworthy. a double crossing, like Han Solo. It's both supposed to be, hey man, you're walking dangerous territory, but also amping up the like bad boy, bad girl setup for the character you're gonna meet.
Yeah.
And cut to them driving down through the desert wasteland with no headlights on.
Yeah. Early on in the film, there's a couple of interesting scenes that I thought was a pretty kind of interesting bit of satire or whatever that goes nowhere. It's a little weird that they didn't even just cut it out, but he's lost the Cherry 2000, and this is before he's gone into the desert, and he goes into his office job, and he has these couple of buddies there, these kind of goofy. One was the guy who starred in the show Sledgehammer. I don't know if you remember Sledgehammer from the 80s. It was a short-lived show. But anyway, they take him out they go out to a club or whatever, like, so he can meet a real girl.
Right.
And so it's all these, people in the club, like, trying to hook up. And when a man and a woman meet, they have lawyers who come in to dictate everything. So it's like, in the future we've got, and that was funny because that felt like that was one aspect of it that felt like it could be today, where it's like, oh, in this woke era, you can't say anything or do anything, or it'll be harassment or whatever. So we're going to have attorneys to, spell out the how things are going to go for the night. I just thought that was pretty funny. Right. And it's just this little thing thrown in that doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the movie, other than to maybe show that he's just like, the heck with real relationships. I'd rather have the robot and I don't have to deal with any of this.
Yeah. I think the beginning of the movie does use that scene to sort of set up. I mean, it doesn't have a conversation about it, but it does sort of, it's sort of the, the shift of the movie is in the beginning. He's like, well, my Cherry 2000 makes the perfect sense because it's everything I want it to be, and I don't have to worry about its feelings. I think it doesn't really get into that. It gets into like, she's everything I ever wanted in a partner, and she's head over heels crazy in love with me. Right. So the unspoken part is she doesn't ask anything of me except to be exactly as I am. But what takes the curse off of that is literally by design, she's happy, right? She's not, there's not this sort of Blade Runner thing where it's like, but they're people too. It's like, but she's not, right? She's just super convincing. And he doesn't have to do any work of any kind. He just gets everything he wants. And the work only comes in when she melts down and he realizes he's literally willing to go into hell to try and get her back.
Right.
So even though we're talking about it in these terms, from the beginning of the movie, it does. And then it sort of shows us, well, real relationships are literally litigious to the point of, the consent thing is like, you need your lawyers there to get it on paper. So if anything goes outside those lines, there's accountability and there's a paper trail. It is. It's a funny scene.
I thought that was a really funny little, idea.
That would have seemed over the top, except that we have recently had, conversations that maybe what we need to be doing in the bedroom is, I'm going to touch your breast. Do I have your permission to? Yes, you have my permission. That kind of explicit. And I'm not necessarily saying that people shouldn't communicate to that degree, but it certainly doesn't feel sexy to me. Like, I think the idea of some mystery and some nonverbal communication is sort of, can be, I don't know. I feel like I can't even talk about this because I'm gonna get myself into trouble. But what I'm saying.
I mean, exactly. And I think people, dating today, I think a lot of people are unsure of what the rules are and everything. You know what I
Yes.
mean? That it's like you don't want to
Yes.
do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing, And so yeah, I just thought that could be just lifted verbatim and put into a movie or a series today, I think, and play, really well. Now the other
Yeah.
stuff about where, he basically wants a 50s housewife, and as you said, is somewhat similar to Don't Worry, Darling, but in a more comedic way, I guess.
Yeah. And I also think that what the film doesn't get into exploring is part of the appeal of Melanie Griffith. What is her character named? E? Is that her name?
I think they call her E. Let me go back to E. Johnson is what her name is.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the appeal by the end of the film for him is that he realizes that Cherry 2000 is boring because he always knows what to expect, because more or less it is the same thing. There is no pushback. There's no surprise.
Right.
And that's all he gets with E. Johnson, with Melanie Griffith, is it's just a hanging on by one hand, madhouse, wild ride. And he discovers that while that's scary and frustrating and all of the other things about a relationship, that's also exciting.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of growth. There's this sort of character growth that the movie does not get into one iota. You see that because I'm describing it to you. We see that he chooses Melanie Griffith over the robot, but there's no development of that idea. This is not a movie without this is not a movie with a moral. It's not a movie that's trying to teach us anything. It's Cherry 2000 about a sex robot and a Mad Max trip into the forbidden zone, and trying to avoid getting killed by a madman and his goons, and buried in there is this love story.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't run any deeper than that. I think as a popcorn movie, it was fun. It's not the most fun of the ones we've watched, but I don't regret having spent the evening watching it. I got high and I thought that was appropriate. Like,
Yeah. And it's well enough put together. And this is another one where I kind of remark about this a lot, I think, on the show. But, this old movie now, that these old movies that have been, cleaned up for 4K or whatever, this movie looks really good. It doesn't look like a 40-year-old movie or whatever it is,
No.
35-year-old movie. And so yeah, and a couple of other thoughts that I had about this. I'd been aware of this movie ever since it came out. For whatever reason, I just never saw this. And it, I guess they sold it based on, like you were saying, it's Cherry 2000. And I really thought this was going to be an exploitation movie, and it's not. I mean, like you said, there's,
right.
Even the love scene that he has in the beginning, or he and Cherry 2000 have in the beginning, is not, I don't think there's any real nudity in it or anything.
No, yeah, it's relatively, it's tasteful as these things go.
And it's pretty much, and it's not even like they have her or Melanie Griffith in, little outfits or anything like that.
Right, no space bikinis.
No space bikinis. It's pretty much bloodless. I don't remember that. There's violence in the terms in terms of people being shot and things, but I don't really remember any blood or gore or anything like that.
Right.
But these movies are always funny to me. So we had tons of these in the 80s, partly I think just because of the success of Mad Max, but we had lots and lots of these post-apocalyptic movies that take place in the desert. And one theory that I have for this is, the popularity of Mad Max, but also I think these movies were probably just easy to make because they just go out in the desert. You don't have to have a lot of sets or anything. Although this has, especially the ranch, I forget what it was called, like Sky Ranch or something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Is a pretty neat set. But these movies to me always really have a feel of of just kids playing. You know what I
Yes.
mean? It makes me
Yes.
think of when we did Super 8 movies when we were kids.
Yes.
And this just really feels like, with, somewhat of a budget, a bunch of people just out in the woods, out in the desert rather, playing,
And I
as
think
opposed to.
I think that speaks to the intended audience. I think that this was a movie in the 80s that was like this. I mean, not that mom and dad can't come to this movie, but I think this is for high school kids and young college kids out on dates or out killing time on a Saturday. It's a popcorn movie. It's not a thinker. It wasn't a big budget. It couldn't have been. I don't know what the budget was. It couldn't have been a big budget.
No.
And that's really what I think it was aimed at. It was, if parents wanted to take PG-13 age kids to this, you could. There's nothing so objectionable. Again, there's no gore.
I think it's rated R though, but
I think it's rated R.
F-bombs.
Yeah, but it's a pretty lightweight R. There's not a scene in it. Some of these movies have a scene or two in them that you watching them now, or we remember them from when we saw it as a kid, that left a mark on you, whether it's, I mean, RoboCop, there's a lot, but the scene where they blow his hand off in RoboCop, that scarred me. I was just like, oh my God. And that whole movie has a gore aspect to it that is designed to leave an impression. So that's not a great example, but I feel like there's a lot of these movies that spent a big chunk of their budget on that one thing that they were going to reference in the trailer, or it's an album that's mostly forgettable, but there's like one catchy single on it, and they spend all their money on that, whether it's a robot that skewers someone, or whether it's a particularly racy sex scene or something like that. They've got one kind of anchor scene that they're like, this is the one that'll get it. And I don't feel like there really was that envelope pushing or ratings board challenging scene in this movie. I think it was R for kind of adult themes. Still pretty tame, even by the 80s standards, and language. Because I just wanted to say, well, we want to be able to say whatever we want. And it was kind of refreshing.
And even that, it's not like it's good. Yeah.
It was sort of there was an innocence to it that felt kind of fun, actually. I was like,
it definitely seemed like they were purposely making a pretty lighthearted movie, because this definitely was the type of movie that, like you said, you put a gore scene in it, or you have a gratuitous, like a bunch of women in it in showers or something like that, which it could have easily done with just had a bunch of, robots that
easily
are naked.
He could have gone to shop for a new sex robot, and they could have had a bunch of nude women. He could have, in the warehouse, there could have just been basically mannequins. They could have all just been hanging up. You could have gotten skin in this any number of ways and made that either salacious and or disturbing. The nut job out in the desert, that could have gone really dark. That could have gone Mad Max dark if they'd have wanted to. I mean, heck, the wasteland itself could have been populated with all kinds of mutants and devastation and Walking Dead-esque, even just fixed set pieces where you pass some homestead where there's just the remnants of whatever horrible thing happened to these people, even if it was 10 years ago. The Walking Dead is full of static set pieces where there aren't even any Walking Dead. It's just, it's this sort of diorama of the world that used to be and how it ended for this family. And those scenes in The Walking Dead are some of the most, troublesome ones for me. You're just like, oh my God, that's horrible. And some of those are right out of the comic book too. And I think they're some of the most effective and honest from the original source material. Anyway, this movie could have done any of all of those things and still not blown its budget. And it didn't. And I kind of like that it didn't. I was just kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just kind of a lighthearted, fun, silly movie. It never gets too serious or too dramatic or any of that, They're watching this. It reminded me a lot of a newer movie. So we did a girl walks home alone at night at one point, pretty early on in the show. And the director of that, and I always have a hard time with her name, but Anna Lily Amirpour, she directed a movie in 2016 called The Bad Batch, which I have to think that she had at least seen this movie before, Cherry 2000, because The Bad Batch it has some pretty similar themes. It's out in the desert, and it's a post-apocalyptic thing, and there's these crazy, all these different crazy characters. It's a really strange movie that maybe if you're interested, we could watch sometime. It has Jason Momoa, Keanu Reeves, and Jim Carrey in it. And Jim Carrey is unrecognizable.
Right. I think I watched the trailer, or I watched some of it. You were telling me about it when we did that.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I've seen the whole film, though.
It's interesting. I mean, it would definitely be a good conversation. It's a weird movie, but I have to think that this movie influenced her to a degree. I just can't imagine that she wasn't aware of this or anything, but it's an interesting but very strange movie. It's much more, there's a lot more, it's pretty violent, but kind of funny too. I don't know. It's really hard to describe, but I was feeling major vibes of that, watching this Cherry 2000.
Well, we have, just on that note, we have talked about, what's next in our list, and a number of different films have come up. One is the Possession film, which is screening on Shudder starting tonight. Is that true?
Yeah, starts tonight. Yeah. So,
and that's Sam
Neill, and I forget what the actress's name is,
from the 70s. Right?
It's 1981.
81, okay.
And it is a movie that we had tried to do a few months ago,
but couldn't find
because it kept coming up on lists that I was seeing of like, oh, this is a really great kind of cult film. So the actress is named Isabel Adjani. But so we tried to watch it, and it wasn't streaming anywhere. And so then Shudder, I guess, bought the rights to it, remastered it, and it hits Shudder tonight. So, which this is January 5th when we're recording. So for people who have Shudder, it's going to be on there. Shudder in the US. I don't know about the UK or other countries that Shudder is available in. But if you don't have Shudder, I'm not sure where you can watch it unless you can get a DVD copy of it or something, because it was almost to a degree like kind of a lost film. But Shudder, got it and remastered it and everything. And so I think
it's horror, right? Psychological horror.
Yeah, psychological horror. Yeah. So, I'm definitely going to watch that probably this weekend. So if you want to do that next.
We've been talking about the question is whether or not we do that next. We've also talked about The Menu, which I actually watched last night, which is on HBO. What did I watch?
Yeah, it's on HBO Max. Yeah. And we also talked about Strange Days, which is another movie that was not streaming anywhere, and it hit HBO recently. So that's another one that we're going to do at some point.
And so we should do the ones that might not stay on the platform, right? Mm-hmm. Whether or not we do, I think you'd be interested. I would be interested in talking with you about The Menu. That's Ray Fiennes.
Okay.
And a number of other people you'd recognize. What's her face again?
Anya Taylor-Joy.
Anya Taylor-Joy, who's now in every movie, apparently, that's released.
That's okay, because she's great. But
she is great, and she's great. I'm glad that she's working.
So maybe since that one is, you just watched it and it's fresh in your mind, maybe we could do that one next if you want. It's up to you.
That's sure. I'm not gonna I'm gonna watch some of this other stuff too. So the order that we do them in is less important to me than we do them. The thing with this movie is I actually watched it 2 or even 3 weeks ago, so it's not as fresh in my mind. We've had a lively conversation about it, but I vastly prefer having seen the movie, ideally having watched it the day before we record, or at the most 2 or 3 days. So it's really fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
because my old mind is getting a little fuzzy.
And I watched it in 2 sittings. So I watched like half of it a week. I was dog sitting for my sister, and so I didn't have a whole lot to do while I was there other than just watch movies and TV.
Yeah.
And I watched like half of it, and then I finished the other half yesterday. So and it is, I don't know if you watched it on Prime, but I watched it on Tubi. So it's on Tubi for free with ads.
I don't remember. I think I rented it. I think it's cool that these services like Tubi, that you can watch stuff for free, because there's definitely some content that's the only place you can see it, and there's some content that you're like, I'm mildly interested, but I'm not even $3.99 interested. So we'll see. I'll watch some ads, but most of the time, like if we're watching it for this, I have come to loathe ads so much that I'll just be like,
bad.
Here's my $4. Don't interrupt me. You really notice it like when you're really into the movie and the ad breaks in and it's the same ad. They sometimes show the same ad 3 times in a row. It really takes me out of it. It breaks the rhythm of it for me. So, but I love that there's that option. Some people, there was a time when I didn't want to pay for content and I'd be like, okay. But now I'm kind of like, look, if we're going to watch it, let's watch it, and I'll pay for it.
And that brings up something interesting that we've talked about this a little bit, maybe on the past episode or a couple episodes ago. I read an article about this that explained something that I had a question about. So HBO Max is people are kind of upset because they are removing a lot of content. So like original programming of theirs, Westworld, for example.
That's what blows my mind is it's original. It's HBO produced stuff.
Right. So I read an article. It wasn't an article. It was actually somebody's Twitter thread. This is somebody who works in, the industry. And this is super complicated. I won't go into all the detail about it because I don't even completely understand it. But and this was this guy's theory. He wasn't saying 100% this is what they're doing, but the streaming rights that the not just the actors and the directors, the residuals that they get, there are special residuals that the crew members get that their unions negotiated a long time ago. And when streaming came about, it was basically like, oh, well, this doesn't apply to streaming. And kind of the long story short with it is there's something about the time frame that they pay the residuals. So basically the longer there's like a period, I think of like 28 days or something like that from when a title hits streaming, that they don't have to pay the residuals. And then once they go beyond that 28-day period, then the residuals kick in. So basically they said what all the streaming services are wanting people to do is just watch stuff immediately, like the day it hits and for a few weeks afterwards. And then they don't really care about people watching after that because it costs them money. So that was what this guy's theory was for why HBO is removing titles. So, which is pretty crappy, but that's one of those things that viewers aren't going to understand. They're just going to be like, hey, why does, and they were also saying this for even kind of series that seem like they're performing pretty well, but aren't like a blockbuster thing where people just binge the series immediately because people are always like, hey, I like this show, and they're not renewing it for a second season or a third season or whatever. Again, it has to do with how long that stuff is sitting on the platform in terms of how much it costs them in terms of paying out to which is pretty bad. But
so they need a new model. They need to come up with a new model because a lot of these services are generating their own content, and
I'm sure you're going to see, unions for the different people involved are going to say, okay, this is a new world now. We're not going to be under the rules of VHS or DVD or whatever, or
Right.
cable television, so I'm
Well,
sure.
you don't, in a perfect world, what you want is you want them to be trying to create really exciting new content to draw people to their platform.
Yeah.
And you want that content to be available. Like if I'm a subscriber to it on a monthly basis, I want to be able to watch that content whenever I want.
And and of course,
to be fair to the streaming service, you don't want to at a certain point have financially them to be disincentivized to create exciting new content, right? So you don't want some pay structure where obviously I want the crew and everybody who went into making it to be taken care of and be meaningfully rewarded. If a show remains popular over time, then they should get a piece of that also. But you don't want it in some way, you don't want the math to end up being, and I don't know that this is the case, I'm just speculating. You wouldn't want it to be such that in a certain model, HBO spends, $100 million on a thing that turns out to be hugely popular and people love it for the next 25 years. And at a certain
and
point,
they start to lose money on it.
Although they make all their money back and profitable over time, the residual structure is such that it costs them money, right? So because that's going to disincentivize them from doing it. So you want to reorganize it in such a way that everybody gets a piece of this great cake. And maybe after a set period of time, as returns start to diminish, so do the residuals in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it ought to be percentage based. So you can track how many people are watching how much of whatever. And it's like YouTube or how, this was watched 1,000 times. Okay. So your percentage of 1,000 watches, it's going to be, if people are watching it more, that's a bigger percentage. If people are watching less, I mean, I suppose you just end up having to trust HBO on that. But
and I'm definitely no expert on this, but I have read a lot of stuff over the last couple of years that people who are involved in the entertainment industry say that the deals for creators now, of course, the people at the top are always going to make tons of money.
Funny how that happens.
Funny how that happens. Yeah. But, like big stars are signing these huge deals with Netflix, and the other streaming services. But they say that in general, the writers and the directors and the actors that aren't the top A-list people, that the deals with streaming are way worse than what they were with traditional television or, traditional movie making or whatever. So,
yeah, because they're like, look, you're just lucky to get your work out there, kid. Stinks.
Yep. So that explains, one aspect of the streaming services, but so yes, for now, the things that we're planning on watching in the near future should be available.
Yes. So, would you recommend Cherry 2000 to our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's I think it probably definitely appeals more to people of our age that grew up with, these kind of films, or people who are into, a lighter Mad Max kind of a thing, and just kind of light sci-fi.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem like we get a ton of now. I don't know.
No, it doesn't. I'm trying to think that the ones that leap to mind are sort of concept pieces like Her. Did you ever see Her?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I like that.
Where it's not a dystopian future. It's a kind of a utopian future. But it's a love story about an AI, basically, a human being and an AI. And I thought it was a beautifully acted and charming little feeling romance about, one man's heartbreak. And you don't see a lot of that because they made it look like it cost them some money. But there aren't spaceships and lasers and, battle scenes and all of that.
Well, and you had Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. So, I'm sure they paid them quite a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get a lot of even now, a lot of horror comedy seems to always be pretty popular, but in the 80s, horror, or not horror, but sci-fi comedy was kind of a big thing that has gone away a bit, we had these movies like Inner Space and Short Circuit and all these kind of things that really aren't really made anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I love big overwrought sci-fi. I love Dune and Blade Runner 25. I love it. Love it. Especially when it's good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure.
But like I was watching Tom Cruise's, I watched a little bit of Oblivion the other night just because the design of that is so gorgeous. It's
a great looking movie.
I love the look of that movie, and I think the script is really the concept the concepts in the movie are cool. The kind of core concepts. The execution just feels like the studio got its hands on it, and some particularly focus group, decisions were made about how specifically the ending, but just how the whole movie was going to go. And you thought, wow, this could have. Like I had such high hopes for this about all the way into like a third or even half of the way into this. And then it started to be like, oh, we're doing that. Oh God, we are, we're doing that, and then the rest of the movie just had a bitter sort of finish. Cause you're like, oh, this started so great,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So with Cherry 2000, you recommend this one too?
I think so. I mean, I think, there's nothing too much to object to other than, is it great? No, but it was kind of fun. I thought, if you're interested, if you go, oh, Cherry 2000. Yeah. I've never seen that. Maybe we should watch that. I'm like, yeah, check it out. It's not going to change.
I would just
life.
say it's definitely not what I was expecting at all. Like I say, I just always thought this was going to be like kind of sleazy,
exploitation. Me too. Like some
of the always a little bit.
Some of the Terminator knockoffs feel that way. Like it's a robot organism and it takes people apart with its ad hoc blade hands, and you're just like, okay.
And I always, I would see the cover or whatever, because I can remember seeing this in video stores as a kid and even just seeing it come up on Prime or whatever. And I always thought, wow, Melanie Griffith was in that movie. Like that just doesn't seem, I guess it's like, oh, she had to pay the bills or whatever. But
no,
it turns out it's not that kind of movie at all.
It is not. It does not feel sleazy, even though it plays at sleazy. Like the tracker bar or whatever is like, you get the sense of this is a seamy underbelly of this sleazy, and nope, doesn't feel that way at all. It just feels like 80s camp. It's like, we are tough guys, we listen to tough music. Okay.
It definitely feels
clear.
a lot.
It tells the story. Like, you're supposed to be scared of these people, and you're like, I get it. That's clear. Everyone in the film is scared of these people, but I'm the audience. I'm not scared of. You know what I mean? I'm not the bad guy in the desert. It's just bonkers. He does do one thing that there actually is one scene.
They kill the one tracker.
Yeah, somebody is a tracker, is like a sleeper agent or double agent or something. They catch him, and he gives him a bag with a big bullseye drawn on it, like in crayon. Like it's not, it looks like a kid made it. And he has to put the bullseye on, and the bullseye ends up being right in the middle of his face. And he shoots him with a bow and arrow, hits him right in the bullseye. So
initially he's going to shoot him with a gun, and they're like, oh no, you don't want to use that. And they hand him a crossbow or a bow and arrow. Yeah. And he just shoots the guy right in the face.
And, there's no blood and his eyes don't leak out, and he doesn't spasm in an upsetting way or anything. He just sort of, gets hit with the arrow and falls over, and everybody kind of applauds. But I do, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, that's kind of messed up. You know what I mean? Like, that's a
and that
gesture,
scene is
like,
a little
out
bit
here in the
harrowing.
desert, we do crazy stuff like this,
That scene is a little bit harrowing because it's kind of tense. Like, you're like, oh, are they really going to kill this guy?
Yeah, they give him time to be afraid, and he's like, this is what I was afraid of, is that they would catch me and find out I'm a tracker, and so, still,
Yeah.
I mean, I forgot about it until just now, and then I'm like, oh wait, there was that one. I feel like
Otherwise,
there was
it's pretty much like
yeah,
80s TV level violence. You know?
yes, yes. You wouldn't do that on the A Team, but all the rest of this kind of feels like you could see it on the A Team,
Oh yeah.
except for
It's
the
just like
language.
people
They
get
do,
shot and they just fall over. You know, you don't see them bleeding. You know,
Yeah.
squib. There's not squibs going off and stuff like that.
right, exactly. They don't bother with any of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I would say, sure, if this makes it sound like it's of interest to you, then check it out. It delivers, and it does what it does. It tromps through this sort of dark territory in a sort of surprisingly light-hearted way.
Yeah. And after all these years, I'm glad that I finally watched it. You know.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I'd always been interested in it and just, never got around to it for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and as to what we're going to do next time, like it might be, I don't know that I want to commit to it right now, unless you feel like you have a burning desire to commit to one or the other. Coming up, we're going to talk about Possession. We may or may not talk about The Menu. We're going to talk about Strange Days, another Ray Fiennes movie. Might be kind of nice to, on the Menu theme, pair those two.
Yeah.
It's two very, very disparate performances from Ray Fiennes.
And a really young Ray Fiennes and an older Ray Fiennes,
Yeah, where he's an authority figure in The Menu, but he's not the kind of typical, like Ray Fiennes is good at playing the man in command. Very high level, high status, sometimes bad guys, sometimes good guys with a real edge. He's fallen into that. And here he's a chef, so he has that kind of commanding air, but it's much more interesting psychologically than that in The Menu.
And I still have no idea, other than just seeing the trailer, I have no idea what it's about.
Yeah, I don't want to tell you too much because, and I won't say too much here because I don't want to spoil it before people even see it. But it's
and that is a 2022 film, so
in some ways it is precisely what you would expect, and in other ways it's nothing like what you would expect. And I don't think it entirely works.
Okay.
But I don't regret watching it, and I would be interested to talk with you about it.
And it's on HBO Max so people who have HBO Max,
right?
It's there
if you're already a subscriber,
watch,
there it is. It looks great.
Yeah.
It looks lush, and
yeah, nice.
If you can check out the trailer, and that's the whole movie looks like that. It looks like butter. So, cool.
Excellent.
So Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. That's our handle. We're on the socials. Maybe you're watching us on YouTube. Maybe you're listening to us on your favorite podcast, whatever. Either way, thank you for joining us. Like and subscribe. That helps us a lot. Leave a comment. Engage with us. Engage, number one. And we will, unless you have anything else you want to add tonight.
I think that's it.
Then we will talk to you next week.